Welcome to the Beyond Wellness podcast. I'm here today with Nicola Bullock. She is a local soul-led entrepreneur, business mentor. She has a background in everything business and entrepreneurship. How are you doing today, Nikki?
I am amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Rose.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Nikki and I have worked together on and off for the past 3 or 4 years. And she was one of the ones who taught me basically everything I needed to know about getting Wellington up off the ground. And that was very important. I just wanted to let you know and start off with, I've learned a lot from you. You've definitely taught me the way to get things going. And that was important for me.
And Wellington is such an unbelievably beautiful space for anyone who goes in there in our community. It was such an important piece, I think, in moving our community forward. So really, hats off to you and Dave and for the team and for the work that you guys are doing every single day.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So getting back to you, recently you've just kind of switched gears and you've kind of jumped right in feet forward to your soul-led purpose and your soul-led business. How is that feeling for you?
Honestly, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat the journey of getting into the vibration of what really my soul was calling me to do. And, to be honest, I have felt called to do this work for almost 20 years now. So sometimes I'm like, I sort of feel like maybe I dragged myself here with, sometimes what felt like I was inspired and I was motivated and I would lean into what was calling me, but often really, really terrified of going fully in. So I would often just dance around. I would do things that allowed me to lean into this aspect of myself, but didn't force me to go all the way in, which I got to a place where I could no longer really not listen. It was, they say that sometimes you get a whisper and then it turns into, a little bit louder of a knock. And then all of a sudden, life is steamrolling you over and you have really no choice. And it was getting to that point, and I could sense that just within myself that it was just time for me to, what I like to say, fully come out as like the spiritual self that I am and integrate both the aspects of what I call sort of the divine masculine, which is sort of the structure that every business needs, the plans and the strategy and all of that, in which I've done for 20 years now, and really integrate it with the energetics and the flow of the sacred feminine, which, is really this creative force really that is within each of us that allows us to really be who we are and lead the journey that we're meant to live in this life. And so, that piece was always sort of the piece that I would hide. I would, I would meditate. I would do all of those. I would connect very deeply with myself. And I've been what people would say is a very deep person for the majority of my life. Even in high school, I would rather sit and chat over tea than go out and party, until the wee hours of the morning. And so it was really about the full integration of that and bringing it full circle so that I can lead at that level for others.
It's interesting to me how the divine feminine, just putting it in the context of how you describe between the masculine and feminine of business, how there is no feminine in business. It's not a safe place to go. It's not accepted. People look at you like you're nuts, right? Trying to lead a business with a feeling, right. That doesn't exist, because there are the shoulds and the things that you have to do in order to be successful. And being weak and emotional and feeling your feelings isn't included in that.
No, it's not. And I mean, I think that because I leaned into culture development pretty early in my career, when I switched out of being an entrepreneur to go to work for a large corporation, culture development at that point wasn't really well known. People were still unsure about what it meant to have a culture in business. And that's sort of where I got away with introducing feelings into the corporate space, because all of a sudden I was here talking about, well, actually it is about how we collectively feel and come together as a group, and those value systems that absolutely are operating with any group of people You can either let them be on autopilot, which often leads us into, sort of toxic culture, or we can be really, really intentional about how we're going to cultivate those. And so I spent many, many years leading a team of about 1,300 people across BC through that process. And so I could get away with it a little bit, but never could I say that it was the divine feminine or the sacred feminine that is allowing us to really come into our space every day. And one of my favorite quotes is, what energy are you bringing into this space? And that has led me in so much of my career and in my own self-leadership to allow there to be sovereignty in what it is that we are bringing, and also responsibility in that. And so it's like an and both, is that we have the sovereignty to understand that, but we also have a responsibility of how it is that we're showing up. And when I would sit with business owners or would sit in any of the corporate spaces I was in, often the conversation would lead to how they were feeling. And so while I would teach the strategy and which is absolute necessity in business, we weren't really talking. We were doing it behind closed doors around how we were all feeling in that space. And because I started my career as an entrepreneur when I was 21, I knew intimately that being in business and being a leader and being at a level that, requires you to understand so intimately all of those places of yourself that are, come from conditioning, that come from our belief systems, our values, what we've been taught. There's ancestral stuff, that we are carrying. There are past life things that we are carrying with us. And it's like, when I started to unravel those pieces within myself and start to develop a relationship with all of those things, I instantly could see how those patterns were showing up for other people. Because let's face it, being an entrepreneur, it's like all your shit is going to come up against you all the time. It's inevitable that is what's going to happen. And so cutting off that piece of yourself just ends up disservicing your business in such a huge way. Whereas when you integrate it, when you go, okay, I am actually going to build this from the place of my knowing and lean into that trust factor, you start to work with the energetics of it, which in my opinion, and definitely in my experience, allows the strategy and allows all of these sort of more masculine structures to just become so much easier, and it just flows better. And so the journey has really just been in honoring the 20 years of deep work that I've done within my own self around my conditioning and my past traumas and all of that, and marrying it with all of the structure that I've also done over the last 20 years. So, but yeah, you do feel weird. It's like people don't want to talk about it. I had a CEO, my CEO got up after me after a retreat that I had hosted for my 42 leaders. And he said, everything that Nikki just said, like, no, that's not it. That's not what we're doing here. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that is what we're doing here. Your people are your biggest asset. And I thought, this is definitely probably not the place for me to land for my entire career, because, everyone just wants to talk about the real masculine structure of business, right?
Well, the masculine structure doesn't allow for the change that happens within you as you're growing and like facing all of this shit. I mean, part of it is walking in that boardroom and being like, I am who I was yesterday and I am who I'm going to be tomorrow. And there is no faltering, because if you falter, then, they're going to get you.
Right. And,
yeah.
And it's so fascinating that we've built a system like this. And I mean, when we look at the state of the world, when we look at the things that are happening, it's like we can see the reflection of what we've been missing in that. And it's so evident. If you have any sort of spiritual connection, you can feel into that. And so to me, it's like we each have an opportunity as an entrepreneur to really sort of intentionally create that ecosystem for ourselves, which is how I believe we start to shift the collective, right? We each are responsible. I can't go out and change the world tomorrow, even though I honestly would love to. but I can change how I'm operating, how I'm really behaving in my business, how my business behaves outwardly. And then that starts to shift, right? And so the marriage of all of this for me has really been sort of the recognition and the honoring of knowing that everything in life is and both, and being able to hold and honor both of those places.
I guess all of these things that you've learned through entrepreneurship, I guess it still falls true for people who are just working a job or, doing their day-to-day life. Like, how do you feel the masculine and feminine fit in with just a soul-led life, let alone a soul-led business? Like, this is kind
Mm-hmm.
of a thing that everybody seems to be, um, it's coming up for everybody lately with all the astrological shit going on and all this stuff. It's just the more that you speak to people, people are opening up to the idea of it's always being one way and it doesn't have to stay that way. But
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, how do you make those just individual choices within your life when you've got all these other people around you and all these other opinions and like all
Yeah,
the stuff?
it's hard. And I mean, we chose to incarnate at a really juicy time. Like as much as like
That's an
shit's bad,
understatement.
as much as things out there are like a little bit intense at times, um, it still, we chose to be here. I believe we chose to be here at this time for a very succinct reason. And so I think if you're even listening to this, and the fact that you and I can have this conversation just goes to show that, right? That we are evolving, past the point of feeling like we have to remain in one structure. And so I do believe that the structures are beginning to dissolve, and we are seeing a rise in a reconnection to self. And so I believe that this work is for everyone. And I think we have a responsibility to, whether you're going to stay in a job, whether you are going to start your own entrepreneurial journey, that is here nor there, but that we do have a responsibility to really look within and evaluate what it is and how it is that we're living. But people are terrified of that often, because a lot of the time the way that we've been living or the choices that we have made are really actually not in resonance with what is coming through for us. And so closing that gap between just being on autopilot every single day and intentionally designing and choosing how it is that we want to show up and the things we want to say yes to requires a deep understanding and connection within ourselves first and foremost. And then really just the courage to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm feeling called to. And I am, in fact, going to go through with it. I am going to take that step. And it doesn't always look like I'm going to overhaul my life. It doesn't have to be that scary and huge. Sometimes
Even
it
though it
may,
feels like it.
though it feels that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is just the subtlest changes. And I think that there's so much beauty in many subtle changes that add up to be this incredible shift. And so I think that what happens is that we get fearful of many things. Most of the time, we are fearful of what other people are going to say, of that judgment, of, oh my gosh, is this actually going to work? Like we're so afraid of failing because we've been taught that there's this idea of success, which is total bullshit. None of it's real. It's just been fed to us. There is no actual, end goal of what success looks like. That is, your definition of success to my definition of success is going to be two entirely different things. And that is really the beauty of the sovereignty. And so we get really caught up on being in fear of, it's like our survival brains still, right? We're not that far away from evolution that we still think if we step outside our tribe that we might get eaten. And that for sure is a thing. And I think we still feel that way. If I go against the grain, if I am different than what I've been told to be, am I going to be rejected from my family, from my friends? And, what does that really look like? And so we often, I think, really dial ourselves down. We really water it out so that we are not, we don't have that fear sort of lingering in the background. But for me, what has happened is that while I danced all around what I knew to be true within myself, I felt like I was betraying my own truth, which I found way more painful than people potentially rejecting me. And so, what I think we get caught up on is this idea of fear. And maybe people are going to say something, but maybe they're already saying something about the way that you're living. And it's most of those fears, when you really start to narrate those, which I do, I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm scared to do something. Let me write down all of the things I'm terrified someone is going to say to me. And then I review the list and I'm like, it's actually not really that terrifying.
Everybody's called me these names before.
Right? Like, called all sorts of things in this lifetime. Like, do I really need to dishonor what is coming through for me in order to live really in the comfort zone of someone else? And that the buildup of that for me just became so much of like, I can't do this anymore. And so learning to be a sovereign leader in your own life is really the first step of just getting clear, of just knowing what is coming through for you. And I agree, it changes. You know, the version of me that I was 6 months ago is not the version of me that is sitting here in front of you today, nor will it be the version of me in another 6 months from now. You know, that is why we evolve. That's the beauty of it. And so it's really just about a commitment and a devotion, I think, to listening inwards first and foremost, which obviously I know you teach and give people the tools to be able to do that, right? But I'm sure you experience the same thing, that people are just afraid. They're just afraid of what's going to come up for them.
Yeah. Well, and I experience the same thing in my life, right? Mm-hmm. When I start feeling sad and I start feeling like I don't want to do the things that I've been working towards doing and all of that kind of stuff, it's not that there's something wrong with my life. It's just the fact that all of a sudden I've grown and shifted and I'm not working and moving in alignment with where I need to be. And so I find, and I feel that a lot of people need to just take it easy on themselves a little bit and stop being so critical, because if you're feeling like something's not in alignment, that's because it's not. And so just stopping and asking, okay, what is it that's not in alignment? You're not going to know the answer right away. And to be perfectly honest, you can let me know if you agree or not, but at some point you get tired of changing into the same person or a different person every 6 months, right? Yeah. But that's what evolution is. And when you choose to start looking at yourself, it's not that you always it's not that you're always wrong or there's something wrong with you. It's just you're growing because you keep actually paying attention to the lessons and learning the different things. And you're trying to become in alignment with who you are now, which will change, like you said, in 6 months, and then 6 months from then, and so on and so forth, right?
And that's just, and the journey is the goal, right? It's not this that we're going to arrive anywhere. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll probably be doing this work when I'm 85 years old, still within myself, right? And that is that, again, because this old paradigm of what we've been taught is that we arrive at something and that's the goal. It's that really allowing that to decondition out of us, to just say, actually, it's not, the point is not really to arrive anywhere, but the point is really to be able to sink into your life and go and look around and say, wow, I am so glad to be here. I am this is it. And then again, you're just going to roll through the iterations of that as you grow and evolve.
Right. And it's okay to acknowledge that at this time in your life, you're not okay with where you are, right? And that's not that you've done something wrong, but that just means it's time to pivot. It's time to actually ask those questions and start to move, because that's where the fear sets in, is when someone's been sitting there for 40 years at a job that they hate and so on and so forth, and they're looking for the answer that they read in a book of someone who said they found the end of their journey. It's like they're just as unhappy as you are, whether they're making $1 million selling a book or not, because they're not actually doing what's best for them either. Yeah. Right? Everybody's always got this preconceived idea, like you said, of what success is supposed to look like. And honestly, success is just waking up and not wanting to leave the life that you're in.
Yes. That's so beautiful, right? And being able to be present in it without things constantly knocking up against you. And I mean, I don't believe in perfection. So again, I haven't experienced looking around and going 100%, I'm nailing it in all ways. I have not experienced that. Perhaps that's the next iteration, but I have not been there yet. I've spent the last 20 years going, this is real good. I need to lean into this a little bit. I'm feeling the edges of it. This needs an overhaul, and because I love the journey of that, it's been okay. It has always felt like, wow, but I can look around my life and go, holy man, how did I land here? It's so beautiful,
Right.
And I think that for me, that is the version of success. And while there are outward things that, of course, I desire and all of those, it really is an internal game. And it really is just being able to connect inwards and go, okay, I feel really comfortable here, or this is coming up for me and I need to make a shift. It doesn't have to always feel hard and challenging and like you have to make all of these huge leaps. I think that's where there's a misconception. Sometimes it's like, Nikki, you need to drink more water. Like your body needs
It's just
hydration.
simple.
Can you move a little bit today? Like get off the computer and go dig in the garden. Like sometimes the things that come through me are not, you need to start a new business, you have to quit your job. Sometimes those things come through, but not always. Most of the time it's like a recalibration back into where I know I need to be. And so when you get to that place, to me, it's just the most beautiful place to live because I can trust myself to be able to give myself the answers that I need. I don't have to look for that externally anymore.
So then what would your main suggestions be, or your main suggestion, whichever,
Mhm.
for someone who's just feeling stuck, for someone who, like, you said that you've been on this entrepreneurial path since you were 21 years old. But like, how did that feel for you to finally just step back and go, nope, none of this? Like, what should
Mhm.
these people do? What's your little piece of advice to kind of help them out?
I mean, I like have not gotten here alone. That's for sure. So for
No.
one, I spend a lot of time connecting inwards. So even as a young adult, that was a priority for me. I've been in therapy for 20 years. Like I'm 41 now. That the devotion and commitment to not only when I feel something wrong, quote unquote, that needs to be shifted, I go to therapy even when I'm in joy of wanting to expand that and wanting to get curious around my own edges. So I allow other people to hold space for me. So there's, cranial sacral therapy. Like there's a lot of things that I've done and continue to do that allow me to kind of massage those edges and don't so it doesn't feel like I'm coming up against it so incredibly challenging all the time.
Hmm.
But really, you don't have to do any of those things. I think you just need to get curious. Just be so curious about what's coming up. We judge these ideas and these downloads that we have all the time. And we usually judge them as good or bad. And what I think is really important is just allowing ourselves to remain neutral in them and just being curious about them and saying, like, okay, so this is coming up for me right now. Let me just lean into this a little bit. Like, where is that stemming from? Why am I feeling that way? Is it from conditioning? Is it from a past wound or past trauma? And if that's the case, then certainly reach out. I mean, Wellington has, a plethora of
Yeah,
space
people.
holders that could hook you up with that inquiry, right? But but to me, it just starts at the willingness of even just allowing that thought to be present. And when we just sit with it, and a lot of people will say, like, you're so okay with being in the discomfort of things. And I am. That is it's a learned process that I've had to take myself through many, many times, from the first time I walked into a therapist's office when I was 19 and sat in the discomfort of where I was at that point. I've just become really okay with knowing that not everything has to be happy all of the time, but that as I lean into those, my own edges, the happiness comes from that. And so, I'll almost likely be in therapy until the day I die, of just, again, that invitation of self inquiry. Um, so I really think that is just to get curious around what's coming up for you, to create quiet space. We run around. I have 3 kids. So like I could easily
Not.
not prioritize. I could easily not prioritize. And they're at the ages where we're busy. We have all the activities on the go. It just doesn't really stop. But I still find time. And sometimes that means it's 5 minutes in the school parking lot where I throw on a guided meditation, or I just connect into my breath. Because I've cultivated that practice, it doesn't often require, a huge amount of time on my hand anymore. I can drop in pretty quickly and ask myself. I can do that self inquiry internally now. But it's really just about giving yourself the space to be heard. I think all of us have a soul. All of us, have that divine connection. It's just about whether or not we're allowing this space for it to really show up for us. And when I really allowed that voice to come through, and when I really stopped ignoring it, was probably the biggest thing, is when I actually would take its advice and I would, follow through on those things. That is when everything inside of my body and like my whole everything started to shift for me. And it's just been the most, I think, just unbelievable journey that I could have asked for in this lifetime.
Very cool. I guess there's something to be said too, that if someone starts to listen to that voice or wants to start challenging themselves and asking themselves those questions, is that if you're asking yourself those questions and starting to sit in the discomfort little bits at a time, you don't have to include anybody else in that. Like,
You don't.
nobody knows what you're thinking. Nobody knows that you're choosing to try something new. And that's, I feel, the fear of judgment of others if you're going to fail. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to know which direction to go, or that if this voice that's telling you to do something is correct, if you're hearing it correctly, like, just try. Just stop for those 5 minutes when you're sitting in the parking lot and be like, what if I just sat here for 1 minute? Who would know? Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Just like reminding yourself of that fact and just trying little bits at a time, sticking your toes in the water, right? You don't have to jump all the way in, because no one's taught any of us how to do this.
Mm-mm.
Everybody's journey is a little bit different, and at some point all of us have been scared. And even though we've been practicing and doing this for longer, like you said, the first time you walked into therapy you were 19, but I'm sure there's been multiple times since then that you've walked in and gone, shit, I'm here again. How in the hell did I get here again? I'm terrified and I don't want to do this.
Yeah,
Right?
100%.
But you still sit there because who else is going to know that you made that decision and that it took you 2 weeks to go back there?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Nobody.
Yeah,
So just,
and I think that sovereignty is a muscle that we don't talk enough about, because again, we've been fed this idea of how we're supposed to be. And so many of us look outwards. We ask our friends for advice. We, you know, even some therapists will give you unsolicited advice sometimes. And sometimes I've been like, that's not for me. That's not the advice for me. I'm going to listen internally.
yeah.
Um, and it is hard. Like there's grief that is attached to that. It's not like we're all sitting here going, I'm going to have my question answered and sunshine and roses are no, that's not
Friggin'
what
nice.
I say. That would be super nice. I say often, this is like, for me, the journey to getting here has been like, I'm a cat trying to be baptized. It's like, I'm like clawing. I'm clawing at anything to be like, don't make me do this. Just let me, just let me stay in my safe little world. But because I have allowed that voice to lead me and to be present in my life, it wouldn't go away. There was just a gnawing of like, Nikki, it's time. It's time for you to really allow the full circle of who you are to impact in the way that you want to impact. You can't do that if you're half in anymore. You have to be
How
all the
many times, how many times have you allowed yourself to just sit in your life, just not make that change, and actually just try to ignore it? Like, were you
Of-
happy in that life where you thought you were happy, or did it just keep getting worse and worse and worse?
Well, I mean, I think that there have been moments where that evidence has shown up really, really quickly for me. And then there's been times where I've just let it simmer. I've just let it simmer for years.
Yeah.
And because, I laugh and say often my soul comes to speak to me, and I get a lot of like audible downloads of like, it'll just say what I need to do. And I'll be
Yeah.
washing dishes and I'm like, I don't want to fucking do that right now. Like, I'm
I don't
content.
want to make another website.
Right? I'm just
Yeah.
not interested in doing it anymore. Right. And
Yeah.
so it, and that's the thing. I believe now where I am at this point, I'm really trying to collapse time between what I'm hearing and the action that I take. But by no means, this has taken me 20 years to
Yeah.
really let those downloads and what I'm hearing or feeling really lead me like in the moment. I think that again, I had to decondition all of that fear around being judged or what are people going to say about me. I had to let things go that I loved. I had to let things go that I loved, that were good, that were so, so good, in order for me to step into the fulfillment of myself. And that's really scary. That's scary. And, I used to make judgment. I used to have judgment about other people who would do this, being like, oh, well, they must have all the resources to fall back on. They must have a trust fund. They must have something where, it doesn't really matter if they're, playing around with that. And what I realized is that was actually just my fear talking of like, okay, I don't have that to fall back on. And so this really is me. It's me doing this. It has to be in alignment with that, but that I'm going to go for it anyways because I trust myself. Because I have that trust in what's coming through. And does it mean that it's going to be perfect and happen overnight? No, it does not. But I can say, and I can lean into the fact that I am going to trust myself always. And that regardless of what is being mirrored back to me, that often is just my own internal stuff that I know is there that I just need to get into deeper alignment with. And so I don't think that that's going to go away. I think that those voices of fear, I think that the reflections back to us, that's always going to be present. But it wasn't a strong enough case for me anymore to not fully go in.
Yeah. I feel that, like you said, collapsing that time between receiving your downloads of what you need to do and actually doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and just leaning into that trust, that's 100% learned through experience. And I
Absolutely.
feel that it's very easy, and I've said this in a couple other podcasts with a few other people. It's very easy for us to sit here and go, just trust what's coming through. Everything will be fine if you surrender and just go for it. But like, we've all we've all needed to do this so many times. And the reason that we're just sitting here saying, just relax, it will be fine, is because we've punched ourselves in the face enough. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. And I
You
mean,
will
there's,
go.
I feel like there's been times where I've thought I've listened and I've had to calibrate that a little bit deeper to
Mhm.
understand. And if you're just getting started on tapping into that place of yourself, like you have to practice that. It's a practice and you have to find the evidence. And when I started to stockpile that evidence, when I started to look around, and certainly I can take the long view of the last 20 years now and go, oh my God, so many times the universe was just showing up for me. And I didn't even realize it in the moment, right? I didn't
Right.
realize it in the moment. But that requires, again, for you to just try. And it's not always going to work out. And that's okay. Again, we've somewhere along the line, been told and taught that like success is the only avenue. And if you fail, well, like now you're in shit. And it's
That's
like,
where the
what?
lessons are, though.
Yeah,
That's where the actual learning
right?
is.
I
Yeah.
have taken so much from my quote unquote failures, like probably more so than the great successes that I've had in my life,
Yeah.
because those have allowed me to explore. okay, how did I get here? What was happening for me in that moment? What was I operating from? And often that's a place of ego or a place of conditioning or any of those places that maybe needed a little bit of nurturing. And so they sort of led me to be able to transform those pieces of myself. And I think, we should fail more often, to be honest, because it is, such a great a learning tool and an
Mhm.
evaluation tool,
It's the fear that stops people from doing it, though. It stops them from even trying.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Guru Karat said, and this has stuck with me, is how are you supposed to know what good is if you don't allow yourself to experience bad? Right? And
right?
I've heard her say it a few times in different contexts, to like, how are you supposed to feel joy if you haven't truly felt sadness? Or how are you supposed to feel happy if you haven't truly felt depressed? And it's like,
Exactly.
we're here, we're, souls experiencing a human life where we get to have these ups and the downs. And that's why we're here, is for the downs. The ups
Yeah.
are nice, but
Yeah.
like the lessons and the learning, it all comes from somewhere.
Well, and I think that, we've, again, I have 3 children, and it's like the good emotions we pump up real, like, yeah, you want to be happy, you want to be, and then the
Right.
bad emotions somehow get this terrible rap of like, we don't want that to show up. And I'm like, that's not even being human then. That's not even really anchoring into the experience of what we're here to experience in this lifetime, which is like the oscillation between everything. It's the spectrum of all of those pieces. And so when you, I think, get into relationship of just being in a more neutral place with all of it, it all of a sudden doesn't feel so conflicting within yourself to go, oh, today's just not a 10. Today's a 2. And I'm just going to
Staying
nurture
with
that. Yeah, right? I'm going to Netflix and chill over here. Like, thank you. I'm going to eat a bag of chips. I'm going to just maybe have a pity party for myself for a hot minute. I'm going to feel what I need to feel. And then probably tomorrow, I'm going to be back to feeling like my amazing self, and that there's nothing wrong with that.
No, and that's
Like,
probably because you allowed
healthy.
yourself to feel the shit.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it's part of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep. Yep.
I, my girlfriends on I think it was on my 39th birthday or maybe my 40th birthday, asked me, like, if there was any piece of advice I had. And I was like, if there's anything that I want people to know, it's that your pain is here to serve you. And that if you use it in that way, if you allow it to be a gift in your life, like, watch out. Like, everything gets good. Even when you're in the middle of a shitstorm, you're like, wow, this is unbelievable. Like, it's here for me. And it's hard, and it sometimes takes you to your knees. Like, by all means, have been taken to my knees a lot in my life, but that has always been a gift in some way, in some shape or form.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today, Nikki.
Oh, thank
Sharing
you.
your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got so much to teach. You've experienced a lot in your short life so far. And so
Certainly
I love
have.
to watch you doing your thing and growing and allowing all that to happen. And yeah,
Well,
thank you
thank
for
you for
allowing
this
me to be a
space.
little bit of part of it too.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's just,
Of
like,
course.
one of my things is like, I need to just open my voice more often. And because I was scared for so many years of like leaning into this part of myself, this was a really beautiful invitation. So thank you.
Yeah. So Nikki, I've just got one question for you. What does wellness mean to you?
Wellness. Oh, I really believe that wellness for me is about being able to be where you are in presence and to just feel good about that. To not be constantly looking to be at that next place, but to really just to be here and to look around and be filled with gratitude.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.